Metroid Prime was my introduction to Metroid, this beloved trilogy. But this sub-series is no longer just these three titles. Beyond exists, and has been divisive to say the absolute least. Before Beyond, for 18 years, Prime 1 and 2 were generally regarded to be the strongest of the trilogy, with Corruption being an aberration, a game that just didn't feel the same, didn't capture the same strengths of the prior two games. But Beyond picked up right where Corruption left off, and not in a good way. After playing all four in quick succession, originally to make retrospectives on each, I came to realize just why Corruption Beyond feels so different from Prime 1 and 2, and that's because the latter two are fundamentally different from the original Prime and its sequel. When Metroid Prime was first revealed, skepticism was the most positive attitude many Metroid fans had. The game resembled a first-person shooter from the outset. Without the full game to go off of, that perspective is very understandable. However, Prime 1 is a first-person shooter in appearance only. The game itself is laid out and designed just like Super Metroid was 8 years earlier. The areas are connected like webs, and each map is stacked. Every room connects to several others, pathways cross all over, and each room has entirely unique geometry. First-person shooters are often objective-based. You move down a linear pathway to the goal, fighting enemies as they appear to block your way. Metroid Prime never does that. Early on there's linear pathways, but after getting your first upgrade, so many options open up, and each follows suit. You could visit Magmoor caverns early after getting the missiles, go visit the Choja Temple, or progress towards the Morph Ball. The point is, Metroid Prime is never directly linear. There's a linear order to upgrades, but you can backtrack whenever you want, and I know I do frequently when I play this game in Echoes. Speaking of Echoes, the best Metroid game, it's designed in the same way, perhaps a little better. Every area connects in Echoes, so you don't have to trek through one zone just to get to another. Looking at you, Magmoor. Of course you can't do this at the start. The game opens up more paths and shortcuts as you gain abilities. The main difference between Prime 1 and Echoes is that Echoes primarily puts you in one area for each chunk of the game. You can backtrack whenever, of course, but when you have to, it's so much more rewarding because you've gotten so much stronger, and it's been a long time since you walked through the map. Both these titles share stacked, web-like maps, opening up as you progress, with lots of small hints at items that you'll be able to get much later. This is the design that the 2D Metroids follow, except Fusion of course, and it works amazingly in 3D. It serves to further immerse you in the role of Samus, just as much as the various visor effects throughout the trilogy. You're exploring a new world, discovering the ins and outs, forging a path forward, gaining upgrades as a reward for doing so. So, how did Corruption mess that up? Corruption took the web-like, carefully crafted, interconnected worlds of Prime 1 and 2, and threw them away. Corruption's map design is a complete betrayal of the previous two installments. The map is linear. Sure, there are shortcuts, but most come in the form of skipping from one half of the map to the other, rather than interconnecting everywhere. Take, for example, the tunnel that opens in Brio Fire after you get the ice missiles. It only works from one side. The next time you have to go there, you're taking the exact same route you took the first time, only now there's different enemies. More space pirates, oh joy. You can open up one shortcut back to the beginning, but once again, you're going from the end of the path to the beginning. If there's an upgrade in that middle segment, you have to approach from either side and either backtrack or continue on your path afterwards. Then there's the ship. Because of it, each planet is divided into segments, further increasing the linearity of the maps. You'll always land in a closed-off area and make your way in one direction. The one exception is on the Space Pirate homeworld, at the very end of the game, but that part of the map is almost a circle. This change makes it so you're no longer exploring, you're heading towards the objective, fighting whatever enemy that gets in your way, doing the same sparse platforming you did the first time you went down that hole. You know, that sounds kinda familiar. Oh yeah, that's how first-person shooters design their maps. Linear gauntlets of enemies and obstacles. It's odd how the series immediately disproved the assumption that it would be a Metroid-skinned FPS, only to become the very thing it swore to destroy. Oh, yeah, and Beyond does the same thing, but somehow even worse. Whereas Corruption made maps more linear but still kept several shortcuts, Beyond leans even further into linearity. The worst offender is by far the Great Mines, but every map falls into this trap. Fury Green, the first area, has no changes in how you traverse it except for one jump after you get the space jump boots. There is one route in every area, either forward or backward, depending on if you use the few shortcuts or not. Just like Corruption, every shortcut puts you at the end of a linear path, But unlike Corruption, which tries to branch out near the end, Beyond isn't even on the map. Areas changed in Corruption, obstacles and enemies are often completely different by the end, but in Beyond, you'll be shooting the same lizards and robots from beginning to end. Corruption also lacked enemy variety, since most hostiles were space pirates, but Beyond is infinitely worse. Every zone except 2 have a different color of Griever, and the 2 that don't are filled with the same robots. And the worst part is, the game swarms you with both of those enemies constantly, both when you first enter the area and when you backtrack. And speaking of backtracking, Beyond's backtracking is downright miserable. Ignoring Soulless Valley for a second, you're going down the same path, the same way, every time, no matter what upgrade you get. Sure, each room may have a shortcut, but that is a very generous may. I can only recall Volt Forge having room-by-room shortcuts, and that's only in one of the 3 towers. By contrast, take this room in Aegon and Echoes. When you first enter, you can only go through 2 of the 4 new doors you're presented with. You can go to the top path of the temple, or the lower path towards a portal device. You're going to have to platform and go around the edge of the upper layer to reach that temple. Soon after, you get the space jump, and not only does it open up one of the other doors, you can entirely skip most of the platforming you previously had to do. This sort of design is everywhere in Prime 1 and 2, and it makes your movement abilities feel amazing. It helps alleviate the monotony of traversing Magmoor in Prime 1 especially. In Beyond and Corruption though, you'll be lucky if there's one new route you can take in a room. This room in Beyond is very flat, and 2 doors lead the same way and circle back. One is your way back after initially entering the other. But that is amazing compared to the map of the Great Mines. As the final main area of Beyond, the Great Mines is truly a test of the mechanics the game's taught you. And that's not a good thing here. This map is disgusting. It's a straight shot down, no shortcuts either way, the closest thing is the elevator allowing you to choose a floor when backtracking, but each layer can only be entered one way and exited the other. This one zone is everything people feared Prime 1 would be, a linear gauntlet of enemies with no sense of exploration and discovery. And backtracking is a total chore thanks to the way that every upgrade involves alerting more Griever recolors. Grievers you already fought hundreds of in this area alone. This area is the epitome of terrible map design, and is a complete insult to the Metroid franchise, making it only one of 2 areas in this game alone. Soul Valley on the surface may not be linear, it may not force you down repetitive pathways, but the very nature of a flat open desert is antithetical to everything Metroid is. But all I've covered is the map designs. There's still more reasons as to why Corruption Beyond of such betrayals of not just Metroid Prime, but Metroid as a whole. Metroid has always excelled at isolation and dread, even in, well, Metroid Dread. This game maintained its isolation through sparse interaction with Adam and the various enemy encounters throughout the game. Even after meeting an ally in the form of Quiet Robe, he's killed immediately and Samus is back to fighting a way up to the surface without assistance. In Prime 1, Samus is entirely alone. The only guidance comes in the form of the words of the Chozo, left behind ages ago for the planet Savior to find. Prime 2 introduced actual NPCs in the form of the Luminoth, and I quite like their design. I like moths. Especially— No. Not today. The only living one Samus interacts with is Umos, and those instances are pretty rare. Otherwise, she's exploring a world on the brink of death, learning about the Luminoth's war and seeing the effects of it, both through the environment and the corpses left to rot around Aether. Prime 2 gets away with its use of friendly NPCs by keeping them heavily constrained. You have one ally in this world, and he's far from the action, merely advising you after each leg of the journey. And Aether itself feels dead. Not to mention how it leans into cosmic horror with the introduction of the Ing and the Dark World. It made the world feel truly hostile, making your moments with Umos or the messages of the dead Temple Sentinels feel like a true reprieve. In complete contrast, Corruption has the Aurora unit near constantly in your ear. You never get the chance to explore alone. You're immediately given an objective, told a bit of story, and left to travel the linear pathways until you get whatever item allows you to get to the objective marker. You can't even turn off the prompts in the options, just the marker they leave behind. I'm fine with the linear trooper gauntlets in Corruption. They're sparse, short, and fun. A nice break from the normal gameplay loop. But there's nothing to contrast them since you're constantly being helped, and it kills any sense of isolation you could have. And Beyond only exacerbates this issue far beyond my worst expectations. I went into Beyond fairly blind. I knew the troopers would be in it, but I was sure they—
But you're also not sitting next to Phil in your cubicle, so
It's time to address the worst idea anyone ever had for a Metroid game. Mackenzie is everything antithetical to the atmosphere of Metroid. He's loud, annoying, clumsy, and he never shuts up. You're constantly getting messages from him, telling you to check something out, take a new piece of tech for him, search for mech parts, or collect those goddamn green crystals for the 80th time. You can't even turn off his interruptions. You're stuck with this annoying, unfunny wimp no matter what you do. You'll always have him open the map and explain your objective in Vault Forge, on a path so linear not even a toddler get lost. He'll always remind you to find green crystals or mech parts when you enter Soulless Valley. And almost every line of dialogue he has made me sigh in exasperation. I think I chuckled once at him, and that was when he was being a dumbass. Because of all this, I was glad to see him go in the finale, and I don't think I should feel that way. As for the other troopers, none of them are nearly as bad. The closest fit from Metroid and my favorite was Takabi. I like his story. His faith adds some world building to the series, and the connection he and Samus develop is pretty nice. With just a little tweaking, he could easily fit in a Metroid title without ruining the isolation. The next trooper, Duke, is alright. He's kinda boring, but inoffensive. Then there's Nora Armstrong. I like her as well. She's ecstatic at the sight of Samus, her animations are honestly adorable, and I like the bonding she has with Samus. Easy second favorite. She helps establish Samus' reputation. The last is View 995, and he's a robot, also boring but inoffensive. Directing him to break things is a little awkward though, and he often gets in the way of your shots. If I was writing Prime 4, I would only keep Takabi. As much as I like Armstrong, she doesn't fit in a Metroid adventure, and Takabi would require a lot of tweaking to actually work. Maybe I'd feel more alone if Mackenzie didn't exist, or at least stayed at the base camp and didn't speak. But the troopers overall left a fairly negative taste in my mouth. So, corruption disrupted the tone and Beyond followed suit. Surely the story approach is an improvement, right? No. Metroid in general uses its story to set up the mission. In Prime 1, that is very much the case. You get the reason Samus is boarding the pirate frigate, and it sets her landing up on Tallon 4. But instead of the environment doing the rest, you get the scan visor to read the messages of the Chozo. You learn about their rise, their fall, and what they left behind for you to find, and all that extra stuff is optional. If you want to delve into the story more, it's there, but you're not forced to engage with it. Echoes is largely similar. You're given the reason for Samus going to Aether, but quickly find out things are not as they seem. The first interaction with Umos explains some mysteries and sets you up with your new goal. Unlike Prime 1, the story is more important and impactful to the gameplay, but it never detracts. Samus is now fighting to save a civilization on the brink of extinction. She's the sole light on Aether capable of banishing the darkness threatening to destroy it. Every narrative segment is contained, and like Prime 1, the scan logs exist if you want to delve into the lore, and it is fantastically written here, but still entirely optional. Taking away the story cutscenes would actually detract from Echoes. It would weaken the payoff at the game's end and take away the impact your actions have on the world. And while I'm at it, Echoes' story was the first time Samus saved people in this series. It was a whole new victory for the franchise, and one that hasn't been matched. In Corruption, the story interrupts the gameplay, clashes with the mechanics, and is entirely forced. The Aurora unit tells you everything. There's still lore to scan, but throughout the game you're told the plot rather than discovering it. It's no longer optional, and if you read the scan logs, the Aurora unit will be repeating information you already know in unskippable cutscenes. But once again, Beyond does it so much worse. The cutscenes are more frequent. You can skip them thankfully, but they still interrupt the flow of the game. The background lore is sparse, and once again, information is heavily repeated between the cutscenes, dialogue, and the scan logs. Hell, the big reveal in the Ice Belt, that the Grievers are the same as the Lamorne species you've been uncovering, was something I predicted long before the reveal. So not only is the story repeated and forced, it can be predictable, and it feels odd for the troopers to suddenly care about the Lamorne's memory fruit. Samus should care, she's the only one who's been discovering the story, but the troopers care only about getting home until suddenly it's time to do so, then they want to further Samus' secondary goal, something she never mentions, for obvious reasons. It feels like Beyond tried to do what Echoes did with the Luminoth, but failed to understand why the Moth people work and why the Axolotl people don't. The Luminoth were still alive, Samus was fighting to save their species. The Lamorne are all dead or mutated into monsters. All that's left is their legacy, which takes the form of a tree. It's sad this advanced race is gone, but Samus hasn't saved much. She accomplishes very little. The troopers are all left behind in the games, and all she succeeds at doing is planting a new tree that no one will understand the significance of. Maybe I'm being dismissive though. There might be some deeper meaning I'm not getting. Either way, I didn't feel a damn thing seeing the ending of Beyond. and even with 100% items, I was disappointed. Finally seeing Samus' face after a whole game of an opaque visor was nice, but come on, take the suit off. Echoes doesn't do you dirty like that. But the story isn't what makes Metroid Prime fun, it's the core gameplay and the combat. So, how exactly did Corruption and Beyond manage to screw those up? Now, that lead-in might have sounded a bit harsh. After all, Corruption and Beyond are still fun to play, for the most part, but there are some aspects that drag both down. Prime 1 treated the beam weapons like different options in an expanding toolkit. Each had tangible downsides, but their differences made each shine in their own way. The power beam is weak but spammy. There's also the missile exploit, but that was unintended. The wave beam homes in on enemies and shocks them for a moment, but it fires slower. The ice beam can combo with missiles to instantly destroy most enemies, but it's very sluggish. The plasma beam is the most damaging and can pierce through enemies. It also has a pretty fast fire rate, but its range is shorter than other beams, although that rarely comes up. Each has their ideal use, outside of the enemies that force you to swap. I never liked them. Being forced to swap to defeat an enemy kinda defeats the point by eliminating other options. Outside of those fights though, you're generally not using one beam for everything, which makes combat more tactical. Echoes took a different approach to reach the same goal, and I think its solution was overall a better one. Instead of treating the beams like options, they become actual upgrades over the power beam. With the right weapon, you can take out enemies quite quickly, whether you're burning away an ing or freezing and shattering a flying pirate. The cost to this power is the ammo system. Light and dark each have their own, while the Annihilator requires both. This system essentially allows each weapon to have a tangible amount of power and they feel great to use. If you run out, you can still charge to fire a shot, but if you run out in combat, you're better off swapping to the power beam. To help, ammo is quite simple to acquire. You destroy a cache or an enemy with the opposite beam. Once again, the way beams are designed causes you to think about your weapons more, and removes the long spammy fights of Prime 1, replacing them with shorter, more satisfying fights. Corruption completely forgoes the idea of different beams. They all stack now, but because of that they feel more like utility upgrades and don't have the same impact a weapon upgrade should have. The upgrades are too small to really matter. Seeing enemies melt with the plasma beam is nice, but they're still melting with the Nova beam. I like the puzzles each open up, but in combat nothing changes and lots of fights are still beam spam. There are a few enemies that get obliterated by the Nova beam in combination with the X-Visor, but they're pretty sparse. As such, combat loses a lot of interest, only further compounded by the existence of Hyper Mode. Beyond attempts to recapture the appeal of both Prime 1 and Prime 2's beam weapons, but fails to understand why those systems worked. It has the elemental focus of Prime 1, but the shots require ammo like Prime 2. They all use the same ammo. You always have access to the power, or psychic beam in this game, and the shots aren't individually strong enough to warrant using them over the psychic beam. Each is balanced with the other, which would be fine if they were impactful, but most of the time spamming the psychic beam is faster for dispatching enemies. The shots are just a small helper. And then there's the ammo cost. You get a ton of shot expansions throughout the game, so ammo is a non-issue, unless you're like me and the ammo drops never drop for some reason, so the shots can't be very strong. Echoes kept its ammo expansions scarce, but massive. They felt like tangible power increases up until the very end. The shot expansions don't feel impactful at all, made doubly worse by how weak the shots are. They all feel the same despite their different effects, and speaking of those effects, enemies aren't vulnerable to the damage the shot does, but the secondary effect. This effectively makes the ice shot the best for most fights just because freezing enemies is always strong. You can't shatter them with missiles though. By making beam upgrades secondary, their impact and strength was gutted. They just don't feel good to use. Hell, you have to explore the desert of boredom to gain the ability to charge them. I'd be fine doing that if it was just for the second stage, as those upgrades are quite strong, but the charges are kept from you for no real reason. You can get each charge the moment you get the appropriate shot anyway. Speaking of the supercharges, they're a pseudo-replacement for the beam combos. Corruption took away the beam combos, where you had to charge a beam and fire a missile, only to replace it with the hyper missile. That change removed an entire option from combat, an option that feels great to use outside of the pathetic flamethrower in Prime 1. The hyper missile barely gets use outside of the obstacles that require it. I only used it on boss fights, but in most cases the rapid fire hyper beam is better. Beyond supercharge upgrades don't have the same satisfaction a beam combo does, you just have to charge longer. They just feel worse to use in every way compared to the immediate burst of power a good beam combo provides. They're certainly simpler to use, but using less brain power for the same thing is inherently less interesting. But Beyond doesn't have anything nearly as disruptive as Corruption's hyper mode. While the narrative makes a big deal and attempts to scare you out of using it, Hyper Mode is basically God Mode. It's tied in with health in some vain attempt to balance it, but it's far too strong. To compensate, complex enemies have a ton of health, but if you don't use Hyper Mode, they take forever to dispatch. But if you fight them with Hyper Mode, the fight's over before it begins. This problem sort of goes away towards the end, but a different problem arises: the corruption. After activating Hyper Mode, you'll corrupt after a few seconds. The phase on bar will fill by itself, and getting hit shoots it up even higher. This is entirely a benefit. Getting it completely filled is something you have to try to do. Otherwise, you can comfortably sit enemy fire and blast back without worry. The big problem with corruption is that in the larger fights near the end of the game, you'll be waiting to corrupt to preserve your health and take out an entire fight on just one energy tank. It's the worst kind of tactical. You're just waiting an arbitrary amount of time before you can actually fight. It's like the developers were afraid of making combat complicated in Corruption Beyond, yet complex fights in Prime 1 and 2 are a total joy. Look no further than the bosses. Prime 1 has a lot of mini-bosses, several become normal enemies, but its main bosses are all dynamic and engaging. Flagora is the weakest example, being part of the first area, but each stage ramps up the difficulty and forces you to get quick with your limited movement. It's not a hard fight, but it feels epic, which is how early bosses should be done. The first real challenge is Thardas, who has you swapping visors to find its weak points, but also has attacks that block your thermal visor, and halfway through, he fogs the room, making your normal visor difficult to see through. It forces you close to the giant rock monster, which is exactly where you don't want to be. The reason why I chose to highlight Thardas is because it's one of the few bosses to use weak points in Prime 1 and 2. Meanwhile, Corruption Beyond lean on weak points like a crutch. In Prime 1, weak points are never simple. They require some extra factor to see or shoot. Echoes has fewer bosses with weak points, but it's much the same. Corruption, on the other hand, has a few bosses with very simple weak points. Case in point, the defense drone. You shoot the antenna, then shoot its core. Or the Berserker Lords. You shoot their glowing armpits, reflect projectiles, and then shoot the weak spot. In both cases, you had to do damage that feels pointless just to progress the fight, and that's not a great feeling. Gore's fight handles weak points well. They're not simple to hit and lead to short bursted damage windows, and the entire fight is more than weak point blasting. In Beyond, though, everything is weak point shooting. The fusion Metroids introduced in the intro serve one purpose: give every boss a giant glowing place to shoot. There's no reading a short scan log or intuiting a weakness, or, Salon forbid, just shooting the boss. No, you have to shoot the blue and red sphere for any damage. This makes every boss effectively feel the same, dodge and shoot. There's never much thought or strategy behind it, just blast the sphere! When Prime bosses had a weak point, there was always a catch to it. Thardas has you swapping visors and messes with your vision. And to take an example from Echoes, Quadraxis had its flashing leg joints, but they were vulnerable for short periods, and the robot would actively attempt to move the vulnerable joints away from you. By contrast, in Beyond you either shoot a boss until its weak point is exposed, or shoot the already exposed weak spots. It's pretty uninteresting. The one time weak spots aren't annoying is Zelios. Because it's one of the few bosses that can always be damaged, you have to expose its weak spot through tactical gameplay. Shooting active panels destroys them, giving you a window to the core. Later on, an attack has Zelios firing lasers from the open spot, turning your advantage into a detriment. The fight is interesting and engaging because of this simple change. It becomes my favorite of the main area bosses. When Beyond doesn't rely on weak spots during the Sylex fights, the combat is suddenly much more fun. I love the first two Sylex fights and Phase 2 of the final boss. Phase 1 would also be good if you didn't have to deal with the troopers. Phase 1 has weak spots as well, but you do more than just shooting and dodging the whole fight, and it feels pretty nice to throw a power bomb at Sylex when he's exposed. If there's one thing that's consistently good across all four games, it's the puzzles. Except for one aspect of them. Retro Studios absolutely nailed the Morph Ball in Prime 1. It has great puzzles and set pieces associated with it, and Echoes expanded on it, allowing you to boost off rails and even had some boss fights entirely done as a Morph Ball. The first of these, the Spider Guardian, can be a frustrating experience, but it can be quite simple once you realize you can reset its slow phase by bombing it again. The Morph Ball was never used just to traverse pipes or narrow pathways. It was its own segment of the game, with its own puzzles, both in 2D and 3D. But strangely, Corruption and Beyond seem afraid to use it. The Morph Ball is primarily used to traverse pipes and whatnot. Sure, there's puzzles in those pipes, but the room-spanning, giant puzzles are mostly gone. I can only think of one in Corruption, and it sucks. It's just an overly long spider ball track. When Corruption isn't using the Morph Ball for a simple 2 puzzle, it's on a very long, very dull spider track. Echoes had a lot of spider tracks as well, but they were short and much more involved than the long, dull, somewhat repetitive tracks of Corruption. Into Beyond, there's very little to be seen. I like the new tether, but it's always used in a 2D set piece. In general, Beyond doesn't do the large 3D morph ball puzzles that were quite frequent in the endgames of Prime 1 and 2. By omitting this aspect of the morph ball, an entire dimension of the gameplay is removed, and by extension, the variety that came with the different segments. Every pipe feels the same. Every puzzle is either a few flings or a boost ball half pipe. The morph ball becomes a clunky part of the toolkit rather than an extension of your navigational and puzzle solving abilities. It's another aspect of Metroid Prime that was streamlined for simplicity, but the simplicity is once again much less fun than the more complex and varied form Prime 1 and 2 reveled in. It becomes a short distraction from the main game of walking and shooting, which would be fine if I was playing a first-person shooter, not a first-person Metroid. I don't envy the developers of Prime 4. Beyond had an impossible task. Announced too early, released too late. It would never have met expectations. But it still could have been a true successor to Prime 1 and 2 the way Corruption wasn't. But instead it followed in Corruption's steps. It leaned into the same FPS tropes that bogged down Corruption and exacerbated the issues it brought. And that's sort of our fault. It's all too easy to see Metroid Prime as a Metroid-flavored FPS, but it just isn't. It's not designed the same. It's designed like Metroid. The one change Beyond makes to open the game is a total flop. The bike and desert do nothing but bloat the runtime far more than any artifact or key quest. Even Corruption's Power Cell hunt wasn't nearly as tedious. It was actually good for an endgame fetch quest, better than Prime 1 and 2's actually, one of its few improvements on those games. But Beyond not only worsened the hunt, it multiplied it. The keys are just a sign you've killed a boss. The mech parts would have been fine, but they're added on top of the green crystals. A boring, tedious grind that does nothing but hinder the game. Beyond wasn't designed by the same team that did the previous entries. It was painted by what Prime appeared to be on the surface, but failed to understand the fundamental design principles of the GameCube titles. Corruption should have been a one-off experiment, but instead it became the blueprint, and in every way it deviated from Metroid, Beyond multiplied and compounded in the worst way. I can't call Beyond or Corruption bad. They're certainly solid games, but they're just not Metroid. They failed to capture the same appeal Prime 1 and 2 did. Those games succeeded in bringing Metroid into 3D because they were still Metroid at their core. Corruption and Beyond are almost anything but. If Prime 5 continues in the same direction as 4, I don't think I'll buy it. And that's sad for me to say. Prime 1 is an amazing game that I love with one major flaw: its approach to backtracking. Meanwhile, Echoes is in contention for one of my favorite games ever. It took what I liked about Prime, but added to it, enriched the player in a war-torn world in the middle of a crisis rather than after. It improved the backtracking in combat so much it removed any tedious aspects of Prime 1. Echoes is a nearly perfect game to me. Its only flaws come in comparison to Prime 1, weaker music and environments, but those don't drag down the experience. They're more like nitpicks. But if the series continues the trend Corruption started, it won't be Metroid. I'm optimistic though. If Retro Studios, or anyone who's working on a Prime 5, study 1 and 2. Bring back the web-like maps, the morph ball, remove the weak points and streamlining. Let the game be complicated. Let the world immerse you rather than the narrative, and let that narrative stay away from the gameplay. In other words, do what Prime 1 did, do what Echoes did, and understand why they did it. Let the player explore the worlds and discover the story. That's what Metroid Prime was about. That's what Echoes was about. And the series lost track the moment the player was told to stop discovering.